from Syrian soil, and the space therefore cleansed, and the link between Tehran and Hezbollah severed, the link to Hamas severed to a lesser extent, and an Iranian intelligence presence across the region diminished. I don't think it's quite as simple as that from the Western point of view. I think that Iran is it's a sort of happy strategic coincidence of interests. I think actually the West is also concerned by many of those Russian concerns that Ben outlined earlier on. I think they know perfectly well that the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, which forms a dominant part of the Syrian National Council, the opposition umbrella group, is more radical than its Egyptian counterpart. They know Syria was a staging point for jihadists into Iraq, and it once again is becoming a sort of point, a destination for jihadists from Iraq. And they know the Syrian opposition will not be as moderate or as democratic and necessarily pluralistic as its counterparts in particularly Tunisia. And therefore, I think although they are happy to see Iran dealt a blow, and they would be very happy to see Iran fall, I think they are also aware of the risks, and that they wouldn't gamble absolutely everything on the replacement of the Assads with a regime that could be, even if they don't say it, just as bad or even worse on some counts, which is, of course, a line that's being heard a lot in Moscow and Tel Aviv.
Also in Western capitals, I mean, it would be fair to say that there is very little appetite, if any, for any kind of military intervention.
Well, I completely agree, and this is why I think this is the big question. What is the depth of Russia's interests, and how compatible are Russia's interests with a reform process? Or the better way to put it would be to say how much reform is compatible with Russia's interests? How much reform can exist without imperiling arms contracts or the naval base or the nature of Syria as what Ben very aptly called a bridgehead? And I think one solution we would be looking at that may in the longer term be compatible with both Russian and Western interests would be a sort of Yemen solution for Syria, in which you see the figurehead change. President Assad himself step down gracefully and with Russian interests and Russian face saved, but replaced with a new governing set of rulers that sort of is supplanted over the old governing apparatus and thus preserves Russian interest. Because, of course, Russia has a lot to lose in a civil war as well. You're going to see Russian interests increasingly attacked, Russian personnel attacked. I think that's a big problem.
Benjira.
Just to jump in there, I think that you've raised a kind of really interesting point. And Putin is more interested in cutting la bella figura internationally to present himself as a hero to the Russian people at the moment than in protecting any specific qualities of the regime in Damascus. And this offers some room for the West to work with.
Yes.
And that a situation in which Putin could host a major conference, use a kind of Yemen situation,
right,
as you put it, could appeal to Russia, and it would offer the EU an opportunity to a certain extent kind of diplomatically lead from behind.
But of course, if that doesn't satisfy Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Turkey, it's not a solution, because we will continue to see the arming and equipping, or we will begin to see the equipping and arming of rebels from those set of countries. So it requires buy-in from all stakeholders, not just the Russians and the others.
But the reason that Russia is so hostile to attempts to unseat the Assad regime is precisely because it envisages that. And the key Russian concern at the moment is Russia has never fully trusted Turkey, Syria and its Muslim neighbours to the south of not hosting Chechen camps. And it horrifies Russian diplomats that there are now terror camps, as they would put them, in eastern Anatolia, training the Free Syria Army with money from Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
And the fear is that if we move to a situation of regional war and there's a possibility of events taking a turn for the worse in Iran, that the North Caucasus could be in danger. And Russia perceives international Islamic terrorism sort of like the Bush administration did circa 2002,
yes,
as a sort of terrorist international.
Mikhail, Roshchin, I mean, as we've just been hearing there, I mean, talk of a possible solution to this being some kind of Russian brokered conference, some kind of Russian brokered deal. I mean, diplomatically, things are moving back to the General Assembly at the UN, but I think we would all agree that probably a motion passed at the General Assembly probably isn't going to tangibly achieve much. Do you think there is any possibility of a Russian brokered deal?
Yes, I think Russia, of course, could contribute to give I mean, Russia itself just alone, of course, could not solve this very complicated problem. What I can say about this resolution, probably that will be adopted today by General Assembly, it's more or less clear that this will be the same resolution which was already proposed to the Security Council. So I don't think that there will be something new, but of course, if it would be possible to elaborate a new resolution, which really would be prepared by different sides, and there will be included interests of different countries involved to find a good solution, and also I think of different parts of Syrian people.
Just a reminder, you're listening to The Voice of Russia with me, Scott Craig, and today I'm discussing the situation in Syria with my guests Ben Judah, Shashank Joshi, and Mikhail Roshchin. Does Russia have as much leverage over Assad as is commonly thought? I mean, you mentioned earlier that Sergei Lavrov was there last week. However, the situation in Homs is deteriorating, and I think many people thought that the Lavrov trip may have been a bit more successful in terms of exercising a bit of leverage, but it doesn't seem to have accomplished anything.
Yes, this is, I think, situation around city Homs is very specific, and I think I agree that it's rather difficult to influence on situation around this city. But I think what is very important is to influence on the situation on the whole around Syria, and then, for example, Syrian regime and Bashar Assad will prepare a constitution reform, and I think this will be very important to change constitution, to organize referendum about this new constitution, and then to provide a good situation for free elections in Syria in the future.
We're very nearly out of time, but I just wanted to get a final thought from each of you. Is there really any possibility that the Russians could modify their support for Assad? Ben Judah?
The difference between Russia and the West's view of Syria is that Russia has a different intelligence estimate of the balance of forces, is that Russia looks at Syria and sees certain pockets of resistance while the country mostly being under Assad's control, and Russian diplomats don't think that Assad will fall without major Western airstrikes, and they're unlikely to fall into line behind such airstrikes. If, however, the situation changes over the next few months and it appears that Assad is indeed likely to fall and that it's a whole map of red with certain pockets of Assad control in the Alawite hills, then maybe.
Shashank Joshi?
I agree. Although there's one small caveat I'd add to that is that in Syria, the conditions do exist for a collapse of the regime to still allow the existence of loyalist elements to survive for a very long time indeed, in the northwest Alawite heartland, in minority areas, in mountainous areas, and so Russia could, in that scenario, still have proxies to prefer over any broad-based opposition movement. So even that wouldn't necessarily be a sort of conclusive final end.
Mikhail Roshchin, last word?
As you probably know, that the last week our foreign minister visited Damascus, and so there were negotiations with the president of Syria, and so there were made some proposition on behalf of Bashar Assad. So let us see how things will go and how really these propositions of Assad will be accomplished. And of course, I think that the Russian position might be changed, and this depends mostly of dynamics of this Syrian conflict.
These two blasts in Aleppo last week, there's some speculation that U.S. intelligence believes that Al-Qaeda could have been involved in those explosions. If true, what does that actually represent in terms of how dangerous and unpredictable the situation is? Shashank Joshi?
It could pretend the Iraqization of Syria, and in particular look for attacks on minority communities to foment a greater sharpening of sectarian fault lines, which is exactly what occurred in Iraq from 2006 onwards in terms of attacks on Shia targets. It will only make the situation much, much worse in terms of sectarian tension.
I'm afraid we must leave it there. We're out of time. But my thanks today to my guests Ben Judah, Shashank Joshi and Mikhail Roshchin. This is The Voice of Russia. Stay with us.